Hello again. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for EliTheComputerGuy.com and EverymanIT.com. Today's class is creating a Windows FTP server with FileZilla server. So FTP servers are a basic type of file server. This is a type of server where you can transfer data to and from it using the FTP protocol. This can be very, very useful for a number of things nowadays. Many pieces of backup software can back up to FTP servers. The other day I did a class on IP surveillance cameras, and those cameras can send the video feed back to an FTP server. So I was able to easily create an FTP server with FileZilla in order to put data from the IP surveillance camera onto the computer. There's a number of uses for FTP file servers. They're absolutely great. It's a very easy way to transfer data, whether inside your local area network or over the internet into a web server somewhere. So when I first came across FileZilla's server, the reason I started using it was actually for EverymanIT.com. 2 years ago, when I had servers sitting in a data center, one of those servers was a video server. So when you watched a video, that was a server that was responsible for streaming the video to you. Well, one of the issues that I was having was that the Windows FTP server that's built in to Windows Server 2008 was really acting like a pain in the ass. I kept playing with the configurations, I kept trying to make it work, and I spent 3 hours trying to get the Windows FTP server that's built into Windows Server 2008 to work, and it just would not work. The new 2008 server, well, it's not really new anymore, but the 2008 server is more complicated than the old Windows servers, and FTP was just being a pain in the butt. Well, what I was able to do is I was able to download the FileZilla server software, and within about 5 minutes I had a fully functioning FTP server on that server so that I could upload files from my office to the file server that was sitting in a data center. So FileZilla server is just a very simple to use FTP server. You can download it in about 2 minutes, you can install it in about 2 minutes, and you can have it up and running in about 5 minutes. So literally, once you understand how to install and set up FileZilla FTP server, from when you start downloading it to when it's usable is really like 5 or 10 minutes. This can be incredibly useful. If you're going into a client environment and you need to set up a file server for some reason, you can just install FileZilla server and you can have an FTP server up and running, in no time flat, whether you need to share files, where you need to back up to a central server, etc. The nice part with the FileZilla server is you can install it not just on server operating systems, Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2003, etc., but also on normal desktop client operating systems for Windows. So you can install it on Windows XP Home, Windows XP Pro, Vista Home, Vista Business Edition, 7 Home, 7 Professional, etc. So you can take just your standard little crappy computer that you have sitting in a corner somewhere and turn it into an FTP server, and you don't need to know Linux and you don't need to know anything complicated, etc., etc., etc. FileZilla server is a free, simple, easy to use FTP server, and if you need FTP for a server for any reason, it's just a really great thing. Like I say, for backing up data, blah blah blah. So this class is creating a Windows FTP server with FileZilla server. If you give me a second, we'll dive into the class. So the FileZilla FTP server software is easy, it's free, and it's just a robust, very good piece of software if you need an FTP server in your environment. The nice part with the FileZilla FTP server is not only does it allow you to create someplace where you can either send data or pull data from using the FTP protocol, but it also gives you a lot of options. You can create groups, user groups within the FTP server software, and then create users under that group. So you can assign permissions, so you can say that one user account is able to read and write to a certain directory when another user account is only able to read from that directory. You can do things such as you can do bandwidth throttling for the server or for individual users. So you can say that the server will only allow 2 megabit per second upload and download into and out of the server, and then each individual user is throttled to 500 kilobits per second. This can be very important and very useful if you're dealing with a more complex environment. If you have, let's say, 50 computers all trying to back up to one FTP server, you may want to throttle the bandwidth on each one of those individual computers so one single computer doesn't eat up all of the bandwidth. Or if you're having users, let's say you have clients and you're doing off-site backup, so each individual computer in these different locations is backing up through the internet onto your server, well, you don't want that backup to use all of your download speed. So let's say you have 50 computers out on the internet all trying to back up to your one FileZilla FTP server. Well, if you don't throttle their bandwidth, they're all going to use up all the bandwidth you have, and then your internet connection is going to be unusable. You can go into the FileZilla software and say that you want it to have a maximum, let's say 5 megabits per second of download, and then each user is only allowed, again, 1 megabit per second. So that's one of the really nice things with the FileZilla software is not only does it allow you to create one place where you can dump data or pull data from, but you can do things like bandwidth throttling, you can do permissions, you can do users, groups, etc. I'm going to show you all of that in a second, and like I say, it is just the most wonderful thing in the world. The one warning I will give you, if you're kind of a newbie with FTP or you're a newbie with computers, is when I'm talking about FTP, I'm talking about the file transfer protocol. So this is a very, very specific protocol for sending data between two computers. So if you want to send a file from one computer to another, you can use the FTP protocol. You can also use other protocols. So you could use SMB. SMB is what is used in Windows networking. So when you do like mapped network drives in a Windows environment, that is using the SMB protocol. The important thing with the FTP or the file transfer protocol is that you need a file transfer protocol client in order to talk to the server. So this may be the FileZilla client. This might be Qt FTP. This might be the FTP component built into Internet Explorer or Google Chrome, etc. But the important thing to remember is if you're going to be trying to talk to the FTP server, you need an FTP client. Like I say, it's no complicated thing. We have a class on FTP clients, but it's pretty simple. Basically, you create this file server, this FTP file server, and then you need an FTP client in order to talk to it. So FTP clients are built into things such as IP surveillance cameras. They're built into much of the backup software that's around nowadays. Again, they're built into web browsers, etc. Most things have the FTP client built into them, but you have to make sure if you're going to try to be sending data to and from this FTP server, you need the FTP client. The other important thing is if you're going to be doing FTP, FTP uses port 21. Port 21. So that means on whatever computer you're using as the FTP server, port 21 has to be open within the firewall. If port 21 is not open in the firewall, then the server won't work. That's what firewalls do. If you're having trouble making FileZilla work for you, if you install it, it seems like it should be working and it just doesn't, turn off your firewall to see if the firewall is what is preventing the connection. Especially with Windows 7 and especially with Windows Vista. They have a real tendency of cutting off that FTP connection. So you may think that you misconfigured the FileZilla server when in fact you didn't. FileZilla server is working fine. It's the firewall that's causing problems. Also, again, if you're using security software, I warn you guys about this again and again and again and again, and I'm sure you guys ignore me again and again and again and again, but things like Norton Internet Security Suite. Norton Internet Security Suite is really, really nasty for blocking network protocols that you want to work. So if you have Norton Internet Security Suite installed on your computer and you want to use it as an FTP file server, make sure you understand how to open up ports in Norton Internet Security Suite, or McAfee Internet Security Suite, or Panda Internet Security Suite. Any of those Internet Security Suites, make sure you understand how to open up the network ports, open up port 21, and if you can't figure out how to open up the network port, then just turn off the firewall, at least while you're using the FTP file server. Those are the important things you should understand. So with that, let's go in. We're going to do a demo. I'll show you how easy this is to use. Like I say, it's just really great. It's really easy. There's just any number of uses you can use for FileZilla FTP server. So here we are on my normal Windows 7 computer. So I've opened up Chrome and I've gone to FileZilla-project.org. This is where you can find the FileZilla software, both the client software and the server software. So we are going to be using the FileZilla server software today. Again, the big thing with FileZilla server is it's only for Windows. The FileZilla client, they make it for all platforms, but FileZilla server is only for Windows. So this can turn your XP machine into a FTP file server, Vista into an FTP file server, etc. It can't turn your Mac into an FTP file server. All you do is you click on this link, you download and you install FileZilla server. I'm not going to show you how to do it. It's really simple. There's no gotchas. You just install it. Once it's installed, you will end up with an icon that looks like this. This is the FileZilla server interface. So if you double click, the first thing it's going to ask you is what server to connect to, and it's going to ask for the IP address. 127.0.0.1 is called the loopback address. This is your computer that you're sitting's on IP address. If you put in 127.0.0 port 1, that loops back to the computer that you're on, and you just basically log into the computer that you're on. If you have a different FileZilla server you want to be able to administer, you would plug in the IP address of that FileZilla server here. So with this, there's no password on this, and so we can just do OK. Once you click OK, now you're looking at the live log screen. So this is telling you what FTP actions are going on your computer right now. So as you can see, this is blank. So there's nothing going on. There's no connections to this server, etc. It's just sitting here. The first thing that we're going to look at is the overall configurations for this server. So we can go to settings and we get a whole bunch of information here. So the first thing we get is what port do you want to use. So port 21 is the normal port for FTP. So unless you know what you're doing, don't change the port. It will just make everything bad. The max number of users. So you can say how many FTP users do you want to be able to access this server at any one time. Do you want it to be 1? Do you want it to be 5? Do you want it to be 20? If you put in 0, it's unlimited users. This can be very useful as a security precaution. So if you say let's say it's only you who are going to be accessing this FTP server. What I would say is you should put a max number of users at maybe 2 or 3. Therefore, if hackers try to compromise your system, only a couple might get in. The reason I say 2 or 3 versus 1 is sometimes you can have a problem where you log into the system and then your connection kind of glitches out for whatever reason, but the system still thinks you're logged in. So if you try to go back and re-log in, it'll think one user is already logged in and then won't allow you to log in, etc. So if you put this at 1, this will be very specific and it will only allow one user to log in. If something happens, that means you might lock yourself out of the FTP server, at least for the FTP part. The number of threads, connection timeout, so how long do you want timeouts to be, all this stuff. Welcome message, so the welcome message, no, it's not right here, but basically when the FTP client logs in, what message are they going to be given. IP bindings, IP filter. So do you want to exclude IP addresses? What are the IP addresses that are allowed? What are the IP addresses that are not allowed for connecting to this FTP server? Again, another good security precaution. Passive mode settings, I wouldn't mess with this. Security settings, you have miscellaneous, administration interface, logging. So if you think that you might be getting hacked or somebody might hack you, you can enable the logging. So this will create a log file so you can see who's trying to access the FTP server. GSS settings is for encryption. I wouldn't normally worry about that. Speed limits. This is the big thing. So this is bandwidth throttling, as I was talking about. So do you want to create speed limits? You know, a constant speed of 10 kilobits per second, or 100 kilobits per second, or 1,000, 1 megabit per second. What do you want the speed limit to be? The other cool part here is you actually have use speed limit rules. So if you click on this and you do add, you can set times of day or dates, etc., for when you want these speeds to take effect. So maybe during the day, you want to have bandwidth throttling because your office is working and so it needs the internet connection. But at night, the clients can have unlimited speed because you don't care, because nobody's in the office. It's not going to mess anything up. Within here, that's where you can change those settings. So we have the download speed and the upload speed limits. File transfer compression, again, I wouldn't really worry about. SSL settings, that's a more complicated class for encryption if you're going to be doing that. FTPS, auto ban. So these are the basic settings. Again, the big ones that I would say that you should look at are the speed limits. What speed limits do you want to have, and things like the number of users. Once you figured all that out, then we can go over and we can create groups. So groups are kind of like in the Windows world where you can create settings or permissions for entire groups and then put users into groups. You can do that with the FileZilla server. So we can add a group, so we can call the group users. We can do OK. Enable access for users inside groups. So this enables users to be able to use the FTP server. Bypass user limit. So maximum connection count, connection per IP. So we set these settings in the overall server settings. This says, can these group bypass that? Shared folders, so you can create folders for these users to automatically be able to get into. Speed limits, so just like before we could set speed limits for the entire server, and now you can set speed limits for the specific group. Again, we can have the speed limit rules. And IP filters, so can these users log in from which IPs? Again, this is a way to do security. So again, you have the settings for the overall system, and then you have the settings for the group, and then you can go and you can do settings for the individual users. So now I can go here to users. As you can see, I already have one user set up. This was for the DVR, so when I did that IP surveillance camera class, I set up a DVR user so that the IP surveillance camera could push the data from the camera to this FTP server. So that user is there. You can look, account is enabled, so you can enable or disable the account. You can put a password for the account if you want to, or you can leave it blank. Again, things like security. Everybody is always so worried about security, but a lot of times it doesn't really matter how secure a server is. If you just want to install this software, upload some data to it, and then uninstall the software, security is probably not going to be a big issue. So do you really want to worry about a password? Here you can put in what group you want this user to be part of. Again, bypass server limits for numbers of connections, IP, etc. Shared folders. Now the important thing with here is you can give users permissions for the folders. So read on files, write on files, delete, append, which basically means add to, and for the directories, create, delete, list, and subdirectories. So you can add or remove any of these permissions. The big thing is you will see that there's H right beside this F/DVR test. That is the home directory. So you can set the home directory. What that does is when the user logs on, what folder are they automatically dropped into with the FTP client? So I'll show you that in a second with a FileZilla client. But all you have to do to add a directory is you just do this add button, and then you can add any directory on the computer. So if I wanted to add, I don't know, the big drive directory, I can just click on that, do OK,
and now the big drive directory has been added. If I want to set that as the home directory for this user, DVR, I just do set as home, and then I can change the permission. So I can say write, delete, append, create, delete. And now when the DVR user logs in, they will get dropped into that big drive folder, and then they'll be able to do anything they want. So right now, I'll just reset DVR test for the home, and I'll remove these other ones. So now the home folder for the DVR user is DVR test, has read, write, all the permissions, so it's able to do whatever it wants. Then we can go to speed limits. Again, we can set speed limits for the individual user. Then again, the IP filters. And so that's all there is for the FileZilla server. Now that you've configured all of that, you can use an FTP client to access the FileZilla server. So this that I just opened, this is the FileZilla client. So I showed you when we went to FileZilla-project.org, you could download the server software or the client software. This is the client software. I personally just like FileZilla, so it's a client I always use. So in this, we will do the host. So the host is the IP address or the domain name of the server that you're trying to connect to. Again, we're going to use the loopback address right now because the server we're trying to connect to is on this computer. So the loopback address is 127.0.0.1. Then we'll plug in the username of DVR, and there will be no password. Because there's no password to use. And then we should hit enter. And now you'll see two things happen. So in the FileZilla client software, you see that it created this connection, password is accepted, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the FileZilla server software, you also see that the connection was created. So 127.0.0.1 connected, sending welcome message. Then it sends this welcome message. Then user, it sends back DVR. Then it sends back the password. All this stuff is going on. So if we go over to the client, we can then look in the directory that we've been dropped into. So this home directory, we don't see it here, but this home directory is that DVR. And we can see all the stuff that has been stored here. So this is all the files that IP surveillance camera created. So if we want to go in, all I have to do to delete a file, and you can see what's going on. To delete a file, let's say I want to delete this i22.1, I can right click and I can do delete. Do I really want to delete the file? I say yes. And so now you see the file was deleted here, and within the log you can see that 127.0.0.1 deleted the file i22.1. So that's really all there is to it. Again, we do have a class on FTP client software where I show you how to use FileZilla client software better. But really, all you have to understand is that once you set up this FileZilla FTP server software, all you need is an FTP client in order to be able to talk to it. Whether it's a FileZilla client, whether it's an IP surveillance camera, whether it's backup software, etc. The one last thing I will show you though is if you are having problems connecting to this FileZilla server from the outside world, what you're going to do is you're going to open up your Windows networking control panel. So this is my Windows 7 control panel. So you'll go to this normal network and sharing center. You then go to Windows Firewall. And if you're having problems connecting with the FileZilla software for some reason, you go to turn Windows Firewall on or off, and all you would do while you're testing is you would turn the firewall software off. So whether you're using Windows Firewall, whether you're using Norton Firewall, McAfee Firewall, Panda Firewall, Kaspersky Firewall, any of the firewalls, if you're having issues connecting to the FTP server, turn off the firewall. So the other important thing is you may be having problems on the client computer. So turn off the firewall on both the computer that you installed the FileZilla server software on and the computer that has the FTP client. Either of the sides of that connection, the firewall may be blocking that port 21. Once the firewall is off, then see and make sure that the computers can talk to each other. Then once you know they can talk to each other, then go back in and then change the firewall settings. Again, all you have to do is open port 21. But again, sometimes it's not as simple as it should be. But that's all you have to do to set up the FileZilla FTP server software. So with that, let's go back out to the real world and have some final thoughts.
So that's all there is to using FileZilla server to turn your Windows PC into an FTP file server. It's really simple, it's really easy, it's no big deal. It's just great. Like I say, I use this software a lot just for little stupid projects that I have to do being an IT guy. You know, if I'm dealing with client computers and I need to back up data from that computer to another computer on the network, I can just set up the FileZilla server, and then with FTP just back up all the files that I need to back up. If you want to do offsite backup for your clients, all you need is an FTP file server. You know, with internet connection speeds becoming so inexpensive nowadays, this can be a way to make money for your consultancy. Here in Maryland with Comcast Internet, you can get 50 megabits per second down, 20 megabits per second up for $200 a month. So think, if you go to your clients and you say for $50 a month, I will do FTP offsite backup, you only need 4 of those clients before you break even. And then after that, it's just pure cash. And like I say, this is nothing complicated. This is nothing like insane and nutty. You just need to take an old Windows XP machine. You need to throw in a 3 terabyte hard drive, install FileZilla server, forward the port 21 in the router to that FileZilla server, and that's basically all you do. Then you just go to your clients, you set up the FTP backup software, you point it to your IP address, and now you're making money. So again, if you get 4 clients at $50 a month, which shouldn't be any problem, everything after that is pure cash. Again, if you need to back up computers, you know, if you have IP surveillance cameras that need to back up to an FTP server, any of these things are wonderful reasons to use FileZilla server. Again, I first started using this with the video server that I used for everymanit.com. Again, I was having a lot of problems being able to upload large files to that server over the internet. I installed FileZilla server. After about 15 minutes it was working, and it was up and running for a year with no problems. So I mean, it's great, it's wonderful. Like I say, in many ways, it's even better to use than the FTP software that's built into Windows Server 2008. I showed you in the demonstrations how to do a lot of things, how to create groups, how to create users. I showed you the bandwidth throttling, and I showed you a whole bunch of those other configurations. That's one of the things that makes the FileZilla server so nice, is you can do bandwidth throttling. If you don't want that one file server to eat up your entire internet connection, you can cut it down. You can cut it down to 2 megabits per second or 5 megabits per second or whatever fraction of the connection speed that you have. Again, the big thing that I will warn you about is this is a networking protocol. Every protocol requires a specific port. The specific port that is required for FTP file transfer protocol is port 21. If you have a firewall on your computer and it's blocking port 21, you will not be able to connect to the FileZilla server software. It just won't work. So if you have a firewall installed on your computer, make sure port 21 is open. If port 21 is open and you're still having issues with FileZilla working, turn off the firewall altogether and then see if you can connect to the server. The biggest problem, the biggest troubleshooting issue with FileZilla server is the firewall. That's it. Like I said, it's a very simple piece of software. If you're having problems, it is most likely the firewall. If you're going to be connecting to your FTP server from the outside world, within your router, you need to do port forwarding. What you will do is you will forward port 21 to the IP address of that server. So if the FTP server you've created, its IP address is 192.168.1.10, in the router you would forward port 21 to 192.168.1.10. Basically, you just forward it right through. If you're in the outside world, you would use your external IP address to be able to get to that FTP server. Again, if you're going to be sending files to an FTP server or pulling files off of it, you do need an FTP client. This is software that simply speaks FTP. So this can be, again, backup software. Most of the backup software now is able to speak FTP, the file transfer protocol. The IP cameras, if it has FTP built in. If you're going to be putting up files or folders, let's say that you want to transfer your movie files up to the FTP server, you need the FTP client. So FileZilla client, Qt FTP, there's any number of FTP client, piece of client software out there. That's the only thing that you have to realize is you just need that FTP client. If you understand all of that, FileZilla server is just, again, it's just a wonderful, great thing. So that was creating a Windows FTP server with FileZilla server. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for EliTheComputerGuy.com and EverymanIT.com. As always, I enjoy teaching this class, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.